What you are looking at is an early test of Go Motion effects for Jurassic Park. Go Motion's like a variant of stop motion invented by Phil Tippett, and it incorporates motion blur to create more convincing movement. For being a test footage, it's actually pretty impressive. Of course, ultimately the miniatures were dumped in favor of CGI, a decision that would ultimately change the field of special effects forever. 20 plus years later, we now have 4 more Jurassic Park films, and not a single one of them features special effects that managed to surpass the originals. In fact, their visual effects have managed to be subpar, or at least that's what it seems. So why do the effects in a film that's over 20 years old continue to hold up, while its modern sequels don't? What is it about the original Jurassic Park that convinces audiences to suspend their critical faculties and just accept the fantastic imagery it presents? What makes us so willing to suspend our disbelief for certain films and not others? Before Jurassic Park, dinosaurs were primarily brought to life on the silver screen by stop-motion animation. Basically, the techniques used in 1925 for The Lost World were still in use 65 years later. Originally, Steven Spielberg planned to use 3 techniques to bring his dinosaurs to life. The aforementioned Go-Motion animation, spearheaded by Phil Tippett, auto-erotica puppets, created by the legendary Stan Winston studio, and elaborate costumes, also from the same studio. Dennis Muren, a visual effects supervisor with Industrial Light and Magic, had just finished work on Terminator 2 Judgment Day when he was contracted to work for Jurassic Park. If you know anything about Judgment Day, it was one of the first films to utilize CGI in a really impressive way. Dennis wanted to test the limits of the technology that he used in that film, so unbeknownst to Spielberg, he commissioned a small team to create some test footage with dinosaurs. When that footage was shown to Spielberg, he was absolutely stunned, and the decision was made then and there to dump miniature puppets in favor of CGI effects. Upon seeing the footage, Phil Tippett, the man who had built his career on puppeteering miniatures, declared that he and his trade were about to go extinct. In an interview with Vice, Tippett revealed that that decision to go with CGI dinosaurs for Jurassic Park sent him into an existential crisis-fueled depression that lasted 2 weeks until the effects team called him up saying they needed his expertise in making the dinosaurs' movement look convincing. Tippett and crew created metal skeletons that they could physically manipulate while the computers captured each and every movement. The animators could then use this data to animate the dinosaurs. Think of it like early motion capture. The results were astounding. Remember Dr. Grant's reaction when he first sees the Brachiosaurus when he arrives at the park? Yeah, that was pretty much the reaction most of the people sitting in theaters in 1993 had. Of course, this feeling was no doubt amplified by the pacing of the film. You don't see your first full glimpse of a dinosaur in Jurassic Park until 20 minutes in. The film remains grounded in reality for its first act, only teasing the creatures until BAM! There's a Brachiosaur. Can you imagine if the filmmakers had blown their wad within the first 5 minutes of the film by showing a fully rendered CG dinosaur in an action sequence so detached from our own reality, involving a person that we don't even really know or care about? I mean, to be fair, that's how most major blockbusters start now. It's like filmmakers have so little faith in their ability to tell or show engaging stories, they have to resort to exploiting spectacle to hook their audience. Films don't feel right if there's no room for actions to rise to higher and higher stakes.
What we do is if we need that extra push over the cliff, you know what we do?
Put it up to 11.
11, exactly. 1 louder.
Why don't you just make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder?
These go to 11.
It's hard to crank the climax of a film to 11 when it starts at 11. Of course, CGI was used sparingly in Jurassic Park because it was still fairly new and still pretty untested. There's no way Spielberg was going to rely heavily on something so new to create his movie. He also resorted to 2 techniques widely used at the time: animatronic puppets and elaborate costumes. Take the kitchen sequence near the end of the film. In the end, Spielberg combined puppetry, CGI, a dude wearing raptor shoes, as well as a couple dudes in incredibly elaborate raptor suits created by the aforementioned Stan Winston studio. All these effects combined with Spielberg's unparalleled ability to craft tension come together to make up one of film's most memorable and tense scenes.
Timmy, what is it? It's a velociraptor. It's inside.
Part of what makes this scene so terrifying is how grounded it is. No doubt this is because there's only so much you can get from puppets and guys wearing costumes. They are still very much beholden to real-world physics. Also, I'm pretty sure as an actor, it's much easier to respond to this genuinely terrifying costume as opposed to this silliness. Purely CGI effects allow filmmakers to make pretty much anything they want happen. All too often, this freedom is taken to the extreme, until scenes which are supposed to convey a feeling of suspense and fear in the audience end up instilling a feeling of, well, detached confusion. There's just too much going on for the human brain to process, so it just kinda checks out. The kitchen scene attack from Jurassic Park remains memorable to this day, while the eruption on Isla Nublar from Jurassic World Fallen Hopes and Dreams is utterly forgettable because there's just so much going on, it's impossible for the brain to latch onto anything. See, that's the thing about special effects, of any kind, whether it's CG or not. It doesn't matter how talented your effects team is, and believe me, there is no shortage of talent in Hollywood's movies today. If the director doesn't know how to craft scenes around effects to utilize them as efficiently as possible, you're bound to get some mixed results.
We're going to pull together, and we're going to find a way to get out of here. First, we're going to seal off this movie.
And right now, that's exactly what big studios are doing, putting their giant, effects-laden blockbusters in the hands of young directors who have little or no experience working with major effects. They usually target directors who have made one unique, highly praised surprise hit. There are two reasons for this. Firstly, it looks really good from a marketing point of view. At first glance, it looks like the studio is putting artistic integrity first, taking a risk on a director with a unique voice. But it's all a farce. See, the real reason big studios hire young, hungry directors is that they're much easier to rein in. Blockbusters are huge investments, and studios are making that investment more and more each summer. This is especially true now that we live in an era of interconnected cinematic universes. A single flop can undo years of planning, so studios want directors who will be willing to make the movie the studio wants. One that appeals to as many people as possible while being as inoffensive as possible. In other words, bland. This is especially prevalent in Marvel and Lucasfilm. Now, admittedly, Lucasfilm does have some pretty bad experience with directors who were given too much control.
It's bold in terms of jerking people around, but I may have gone too far in a few places.
In a space of about 90 seconds, you go from lamenting the death of, a hero, to escape, to slightly comedic with Jar Jar, to Anakin returning with his little kind of tag. It's a lot, and it's a very short time.
Boggles the mind. Jar Jar is a key to all this.
Are you an angel?
The Senate is full of greedy...
Boggles the mind.
I'll try spinning. That's a good trick.
Oh, muy, I love you!
Jar Jar is a key to all this.
I've been wondering, what are midichlorians?
Boggles the mind. Jar Jar is a key to all this. 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 Jar Jar is a key to all this.
Now, because almost all blockbusters of today need to fit into a larger universe, their visuals have to have a certain continuity to them. That's why most all Marvel movies have such drab colors. Oddly, most other major blockbusters that come out now have similar digital color grading done. Compare the muted blue-tinged visuals from this scene in Jurassic World to the vibrant real colors found in Jurassic Park. Now, that's not to say that digital color grading, the process of, changing colors in a movie using computer junk, it's not bad. It's not bad by itself. I mean, the first film to really utilize digital color grading used it to great effect. The sepia tone that pervades Oh Brother Where Art Thou not only makes the film feel like it was filmed in autumn, it also gives the film a slightly surreal, antiquated feel. In other words, the digital color grading was used to intentionally make the audience feel they were watching a fantasy from the past. Color grading a science fiction film grounded in reality about dinosaurs being brought back to life in the modern real world creates a level of separation between audiences and the film that doesn't need to be there. Here, I'm gonna de-color grade this scene from Jurassic World.
It can camouflage!
Of course, a film could have the best visual effects in the world and still fail to leave an impression on the audience. Parts of what makes us love movies is the feeling of catharsis they can give us. There's nothing worse than leaving the theater feeling cheated of a satisfying end to a story.
I don't know what streets we've been. Ow! What are you doing?
It would be better if you were unconscious.
No!
Here.
God! Dwight, stop it! Stop it! Stop it!
Do you want to do this right or not?
Please allow me to have one cathartic experience in my life.
Now, to learn more about what makes a film cathartic, we've got to go back a couple thousand years, to around 335 BC, when Aristotle wrote the oldest extant treatise on dramatic theory in Western thought. That's right, a guy who calls himself the 90s kid is now talking about Aristotelian philosophy. One of the things which Aristotle tackles in Poetics is tragedy.
Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise?
No, Chief, shut up. Not now. Aristotle defines tragedy as the imitation of an action that is serious and also having a magnitude, complete in itself, in appropriate and pleasurable language, in a dramatic rather than narrative form, which incidents arousing pity and fear, wherewith to accomplish the catharsis of these emotions. Yeah. So there's been some debate by people far smarter than me about what that actually means, but one interpretation is that tragedy and drama elicits feelings of pity and fear in the hearts of the audience members, thus purging those emotions which Aristotle believed to be detrimental to a society. Now, to say that modern blockbusters and ancient Greek tragedies aren't directly comparable would be an understatement roughly the size of a Patago Titan. But I do believe that both action blockbusters and Greek tragedies work best when their plots and characters solicit feelings of fear, or suspense, and pity, sympathy, in the audience. I mean, that's why we go to movies, right? For the strange thrill we get when we experience sorrow, anxiety, and terror with the knowledge that we're not in any real danger. Aristotle believed that every great tragedy was composed of 6 elements. He listed them in order of importance as the plot, a logical series of events that push characters into situations that test their moral fiber. The second is characters, or ethos. Every story needs a hero who is reliable and good, but not too good. They have to have flaws in order to be engaging, and they must also be consistent, or at the very least, consistently inconsistent. The third was thought. This is what the plot and the actions the characters take actually mean. In other words, the theme of the story. The fourth is diction, the dialogues spoken by the characters. Song, or melos, is number 5. In the case of ancient Greek theater, this refers to the singers and dancers that compose the chorus. Now you can think of it as soundtracks that accompany movies. The final, and in Aristotle's estimation at least important element of tragedy is spectacle, the aesthetics of the play, such as the set, costumes, and any effects. See, I believe a successful action-adventure movie must contain the same elements. Speaking of aesthetics, let's talk about the 18th and 19th century philosopher-poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge. He's the fella who actually coined the phrase suspension of disbelief, though the whole phrase is actually willing suspension of disbelief. See, he theorized that readers would be willing to suspend their disbelief while reading poems featuring supernatural elements if the work contained human elements that allow them to connect with the work's characters. The same can be said of any work of fiction. Now, this idea would be challenged later by this Oxford professor, John Ronald Reuel Tolkien. In a presentation he gave at the University of St. Andrews in 1939, a presentation that was later published in 1947 titled On Fairy Stories. In that work, Tolkien asserted that stories containing the fantastic need to develop a world with logic and rules so consistent that readers would accept a second reality. And then, in one of the greatest examples of anybody putting their money where their mouth was, he went on ahead and basically invented modern fantasy. Whew. Okay. Jurassic Park ticks all of these boxes. It's got a plot that is paced almost perfectly, holding to the tried and true 3-act structure, with the turn, the event that changes everything, occurring right smack dab in the middle of the film. It's kind of a weird quirk, but almost all movies that are said to be well-paced have this moment right in the middle of the film. I mean, it's like almost clockwork. It's the scene when the Joker is taken into custody in The Dark Knight, the moment the Foot Clan attacks April O'Neil's place in the original TMNT, and the moment when Luke and friends are taken captive by the Empire in Star Wars. The T-Rex escaping her paddock is that moment for Jurassic Park. It's the moment when it becomes unambiguously clear that the humans are no longer in control of the park, and it's executed perfectly, with a little help from CGI, a full-size T-Rex animatronic, and some very well-executed stunts. Of course, such a moment wouldn't matter much if we didn't care about the characters in it. Here, Michael Crichton, the writer of the novel who also helped pen the screenplay, and David Coeb, who also helped write the script, really shine. The novel Jurassic Park is one of my favorite books, but its characters are a little... See, Dr. Allen starts out as an outdoorsy, cool-headed, intelligent professor who loves kids, and by the end of the story, he's an outdoorsy, cool-headed, intelligent professor who loves kids. Ian Malcolm starts out as a douchey chaotician, actually. Okay, sorry. Chaotician, with a flair for philosophizing, and ends up being a kind of douchey chaotician with a more pronounced flair for philosophizing, who's also dead.
Look who knows so much, huh? Well, it just so happens that your friend here is only mostly dead.
John Hammond is just a little asshole. The film turns Grant into a man who doesn't like children, but ultimately, through the events of the plot, grows to love them, giving the main protagonist an arc. Malcolm, who's played by the living mass of pure, unadulterated charisma, that is Jeff Goldblum, lives to see another day because they've made him so lovable, so unique, that there would be riots if he died. Of course, Hammond, who is played by Richard Attenborough, ends up being a man who sincerely wanted to make something great. A visionary with no sense for practicalities, turning him into a much more nuanced character. The plot and characters are both used to convey a very definite theme, the same theme that's found in the book, though it's a little subtle.
When we have control again.
You've never had control, that's the illusion!
And I'm a little bit unsure about what exactly it is, but I want to say it's something to do with control. I don't know, I'm no philosophanizer. The film also does a great job creating its own reality. Take the velociraptors, for example. This is not what velociraptors look like. This is what they looked like. The raptors in the film are more closely aligned in size with Utah raptors, which, incidentally, were discovered the year the film was released. But guess what? It doesn't matter, because the film establishes the size and characteristics of velociraptors in the opening minutes. And frankly, hyper-intelligent lizards, bigger than a man, are much more terrifying than a highly intelligent feathered lizard the size of a turkey. Similarly, in the world of Jurassic Park, one of the world's most respected paleontologists says the T-Rex has crappy vision. It's stupid, there's no way that he should know that, but you're not thinking about it, because when that's brought up, it's in an incredibly tense scene, and that fact adds to the tension. Every action scene in Jurassic Park makes sense and is consistent with the reality and rules put forth in previous scenes, and they actually work to push things forward. Let's go back to the beginning of that kitchen scene.
It's just the two raptors, right? You sure the third one's contained?
Yes. Unless they figured out how to open doors.
Okay, so out of context, this would seem pretty stupid, especially to a person who has a layman's understanding of dinosaurs. particularly back in the 90s, when most non-paleontologists still thought of dinosaurs as large, lumbering lizards with disproportionately small brains. However, we've had 3 scenes before this which have firmly established just how intelligent and dangerous these raptors are. The attack that opens the film, Muldoon's description of raptor intelligence during the feeding, and of course the
clever girl
scene. And that's the kicker for any action scene that's laced with effects. There needs to be a build-up to each scene and logical consequences after. CGI effects are here to stay. And to be honest, films like Jurassic Park prove that it can be used to create absolutely awe-inspiring moments. The key is the scaffolding that holds up such moments. Without a good plot, likable, or at the very least interesting characters, and logic that is consistent with the reality the story is set in, effects will fall flat. They'll come across as boring, outright silly, or worst of all, forgettable.